on the 5-year anniversary of the Torrance refinery explosion, the Torrance Refinery Action Alliance, TRAA, announces a new campaign urging Governor Gavin Newsom to request Attorney General Xavier Becerra's office investigate, based on newly available, irrefutable evidence, the lack of basis for 2 legal processes that allow the Torrance Refinery Company and the Wilmington's Valero Refinery to use massive amounts of hydrogen fluoride that imperil the surrounding communities. The campaign will be kicked off with the delivery of a letter from the 6-member TRAA Science Advisory Panel to Governor Newsom on Tuesday, February 18th, which is the 5th anniversary of the 2015 Torrance Refinery explosion. It will continue, this campaign will continue over the next several months with TRAA enlisting elected officials of the affected region, city, and neighborhood councils, community organizations, and other members of the community to add their voices to call for an investigation. Here's the background and rationale. Over the last 3 decades, there's been a David and Goliath struggle between the innovation of transitioning to a modern, vastly safer alkylation catalyst, and on the other hand, the South Bay refineries clinging to the status quo, hoping a calamitous event beyond their control wouldn't release their store of HF into the community. The refineries have won at every turn. First, there was the 1989 Walker Initiative, 1989. Then number 2, the original 1991 AQMD Rule 1410 overturned on a clerical error. Number 3, the 1990 Torrance lawsuit settled in a consent decree allowing the Torrance refinery to use HF. 4, the AQMD Ultramar Memorandum of Understanding allowing Valero to use HF. Then there were 2 bills in the State Assembly that died in committee, and finally, the recent collapse of the second AQMD Rule 1410. What to do? Innovation at loggerheads with status quo. That's the subject of a celebrated book, Men, Machines, and Modern Times, by the late Elting Morrison. He's a renowned professor of science and technology at MIT, and his book was based on famous lectures that he gave at Caltech, and they set out a roadmap for progress, illustrated by a case study of U.S. Navy ships. So the Navy, clinging to the status quo, adamantly opposed this innovation. And the innovation status quo deadlock was broken in favor of innovation only when the issue was elevated to a higher level of authority. Theodore Roosevelt, the President of the United States at that time. TRAA won't be elevating the HF issue to the current holder of the office of the President. Instead, TRAA is elevating the issue to the informed leadership of Governor Gavin Newsom and Attorney General Xavier Becerra. And I'm going to read you an abridged copy of the letter to the governor. Dear Governor Newsom, the Torrance Refinery Action Alliance applauds your leadership in asking Attorney General Xavier Becerra's office to investigate whether California's oil and gas suppliers are involved in price fixing. There is, however, a far graver concern that needs to be investigated. On this 5th year anniversary of the Torrance Refinery explosion, we urge you to request an investigation of how over the last 3 decades, the 2 refineries in Southern California's South Bay, the Torrance Refinery Company and Valero in Wilmington, have been allowed to use massive quantities of hydrogen fluoride, HF, one of the world's most dangerous industrial chemicals. It's imperative that the investigation focus on the 2 legal processes allowing the refinery to use HF in the South Bay: the Torrance Mobile Consent Decree initiated in the early 90s, and the AQMD Ultramar Memorandum of Understanding of 2003. New findings, unavailable until now, unequivocally expose how these were based on fraudulently false, deceptive assertions and deeply flawed analysis. Congressman Ted Lieu was correct when he said to the community that the community had been hoodwinked into believing an additive mixed into the acid actually made it safer, when there was no evidence that that was the case. We're sure you followed the South Coast AQMD's year-long endeavor of promulgating Rule 1410 to protect the community. Shockingly, the process was abruptly upended by an 8-3 vote of the AQMD directors. There was nevertheless a vitally important outcome of the AQMD Rule 1410 process. It gave the AQMD staff the first ever outsider's view of ExxonMobil's proprietary documents and voluminous data. The staff found itself in agreement, not with the refineries, but with the TRAA Science Advisory Panel and the staff's own outside experts. Both had already concluded that the refinery's wildly inflated claim that an additive would suppress HF from forming a ground-tugging toxic cloud was baseless. This first ever confirmation by a government entity of the ineffectiveness of the HF additive is crucial because the fallacious and deceptive claim for the additive was the primary legal foundation of the two legal processes that allow the use of HF today. Number one, the Torrance Mobile Consent Decree, and number two, the 2003 AQMD Altamar MOU. There's more. The foundation of Torrance's consent decree, a precursor of the Wilmington MOU, has an even more egregious legal flaw. Following Mobil's failure to show in the early 90s that modified HF would not form an aerosol or dense vapor cloud upon release, the consent decree was modified in September 1994 to allow use of HF if quantitative risk assessment, QRA, could show the modified HF catalyst presents no greater risk than sulfuric acid. Such a possibility confounds common sense. Sulfuric acid's propensity to go airborne is so low that the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, doesn't even require a risk management plan for it. In May 2017, the TRAA Science Advisory Panel discovered the incontrovertible evidence that Mobil's QRA was wrongfully based on a sulfuric acid toxicity 4 times greater than we now know it to be. There's plenty of evidence of collusion between Mobil and the hand-picked safety advisor to get the result that Mobil wanted. But the fact that nothing has been done since to correct the QRA's erroneous conclusion is a smoking gun. It's critical that the Attorney General's office undertake an investigation of what we now know were fraudulently deceptive legal processes that have allowed 2 South Bay refineries to use HF. Thousands of lives are at risk, and there are vastly safer economical alternatives. Well, I'm going to repeat that. Thousands of lives are at risk, and there are vastly safer economical alternatives. Pretending it can't happen is only wishful thinking. Respectfully, TRAA Science Advisory Panel, which is 6 South Bay engineers and scientists with advanced degrees, 5 PhDs and 1 master's, and including the former manager of the TRW Chemical Technical Department, all with career experience relevant to highly toxic chemicals, including HF. So again, this was the abridged letter to Gavin Newsom, which will be delivered to him on the anniversary this Tuesday, and you can read this letter online at the TRAA .blog, so that you can click on the hyperlinks and get more very important additional information. And there are copies of the letter on the back table. And now Jim Eniger, chair of the TRAA Science Advisory Panel, will entertain questions on TRAA's new plan, new campaign.
Questions on this, I'm here to answer them. But we feel that this is a new initiative that's going to give us focus, and we finally have an entity that that can stand up to the refineries if Governor Newsom follows through with an investigation. Any questions? Yes?
What efforts have been made to contact the 3 AQMD directors that voted for against, that were overridden by the other 8? Have you reached out to those advisors yet?
Well, we have a long list of elected officials who supported our position with AQMD. We just announced this initiative now, and it will go on for several months, and we will be going back to all the elected officials and asking them to write letters to the governor. So we haven't made contact with them yet, but they will be.
And Janice Hahn, that you said.
Donna has some information there.
I have an answer to your question, I think. Before the vote from the AQMD, we did many things to talk to, give information to all the boards, the AQMD board. We had driving tours where we invited the board members to come. We took them around and we showed them where the schools were, where the hospitals were, where all the important things were, close to the refineries, both in Torrance and in Wilmington. So if they wanted to be informed, they were.
In addition, they acted in opposition to their own professional staff.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Back there.
Thank you.
Back there on the last row.
Last row, yes.
Do we know what was in that snow that came down on top of us, that we inhaled, that the students inhaled? Do we know what the chemical components of that was?
Well, this is catalyst ash. Is the electrostatic precipitator was meant to take it out of the stream. Gang.
Yeah, I've studied that. I can answer that.
Use the mic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Within a couple of weeks, the AQMD studied the metal components by atomic absorption spectroscopy and declared the metal components were not unsafe. What they neglected, and I pointed this out to many people, if you take hydrogen, carbon, and nitrogen, which are a part of human life, and say, well, they're safe, they're in humans, but you configure it and make hydrogen cyanide, it's very deadly. So it neglects all of chemistry. Not only that, but the catalyst itself, it's a catalyst. Its configuration is an engineered material that doesn't even behave like it's starting silicate components. Lastly, when they take out the spent catalyst, when it gets ground to too much small fine dust, it's a hazardous material that's packed up in bags. And I have an article that I looked up where it says that when it comes out, it also exudes a lot of things like sulfur oxides and things like that. So they have to bag it up so it doesn't exude things into the atmosphere. I suspect that's also another contributing factor to what has caused a lot of people to have respiratory problems. And there's a suit on that now presently going forward, a class action.
Thank you. So,
I'm his keeper. But I also wanted to say there is a class action suit that was that Arnie Goldstein from Postal Solutions, who did all of our printing free for this and everything, is a member of that class action, and I think it'll be available online at some point.
yes.
To find out that information.
I can tell from this letter that one primary goal is to move from hydrogen fluoride. I'm wondering if two other goals include a goal to transition to sulfuric acid, or is it just using that as a reason why we should consider alternates? And a third goal being some way for them to make amends for this, for them having hoodwinked the public on purpose.
I don't think we're going to get an apology from the refineries, but there are several modern alkylation processes. There's advanced sulfuric acid that's offered by DuPont. There's solid acid catalyst that is being used in China. There's liquid ionic alkylation that the Chevron refinery in Salt Lake City is converting to. We're not proposing any particular alternative, but all of these are vastly safer than hydrogen fluoride, which was developed during World War II to create high-octane gasoline for airplanes. And at that time, you know, the risk was considered a secondary importance compared to the purpose of fighting World War II.
Right, for amends, I mean, for them to not just say sorry, but, you know, be penalized?
Maybe that will come out of the investigation. Any other questions? Yes?
I heard this, I think, on NPR a couple of years ago about successful campaigns. It was from a consultant that faced similar issues. And what she said was that when their organization, at the same time they were planning something really neat like this, also sat down and asked itself, let's imagine that it's 3 years from now, and what we've done has been a failure. What would have happened? What do you think would have happened to create that outcome? And then what they did is they started brainstorming. And what she noticed was that you get additional content compared to imagining that it was success. What did we do right? You know, I could think, for example, that what we're doing is we're thinking about politics, but the governor is also thinking about politics. So I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just sharing this as something that you might want to consider as an investment of time at a meeting.
Well, I hope you'll come to TRAA meetings and share your expertise on this with us. We would appreciate it. I think that's probably all we have time for because we have to move along.
Yes, but I would add, we meet Monday, first and third Mondays at the Sizzler on Sepulveda in Torrance. And we have done some of those kind of processes, but we need to do more of them. And we need all of your help, and so get involved. As you saw on the checklist, we had a bunch of things that you might get involved in, research, etc., all kinds of things. So please take that opportunity and fill it out. And you don't have to come to meetings to be involved. We have lots of work, lots of people do things, and can't come to Monday night meetings. And the other thing is that at the end of the meeting, towards the end of the meeting, we're going to have a comment period where this may have triggered some ideas on people's, or you may think of things that are other questions. That's going to come at the end of the meeting.